Okay, we got 5 o'clock. Leslie, you want me to start?
Yes, go for it.
Cool. All right, guys. Hey, thank you, everybody. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and congratulations. I understand most of you are going to be graduating pretty soon, so that's great. I'm glad also to be the one to talk with you, kind of as the last speaker before you go, because it's a topic that I think is going to be very, very important, and I think that's one of my really one of the themes today is that if there's anything that or any time that servant leadership was important, it's in today's workplace, which is going through a lot of turmoil, and we'll talk about that turmoil in a few minutes. But honored to be like I say, to be talking to the about to become graduates of the Gordon Ford College. It's great. So, what I was asked by somebody what I was doing, and I said, I'm going to be talking about servant leadership. And they said, what? What does that mean? And they said, you're going to be talking about some kind of socialistic business theory, and socialism isn't my cup of tea, and it sounds pretty woke. But it turns out that, and that's why I wanted the title that I had there, from the Army Rangers to the C-suite, because as somebody who has experienced both of those environments, I've seen it at work, and I've seen it work, and that's really what I want to share with you. So I'll be talking about that. I'll be, and I guess I'll also be trying to give you some tools and some techniques that kind of fall into that rubric of servant leadership that you can apply. Some of you are already working, and you'll be going back to your current jobs, and you can try out some of these ideas in the job and see if it makes a difference. Those of you who are taking on new jobs, I'd love you to start out with the ideas that we're going to be talking about, because I really do think it works these days. So what is it? So servant leadership, the definition, you can look it up. The definition is simply that a servant leader serves the employee on behalf of the organization. A servant leader serves the employees first, as opposed to traditional leadership, where in a way the employees serve the organization and the leader controls them and guides and controls them. But this is very much of an employee-driven approach, the servant leadership. It's an approach that was first written about by an AT&T executive back in 1970, but it really goes far earlier than that. For example, Frederick the Great, two centuries earlier, Frederick the Great, who was the king of Prussia, he had this wonderful quote that I really love: "As your ruler, I am the first servant of the state." Now, in government, we recognize that, and you hear of public service. People who go into public service become governors, and they become presidents of the United States. And in the military, certainly military service, when somebody would refer to soldiers and airmen and sailors, they would call them servicemen or servicewomen. Okay, so the idea of service isn't foreign to government. It's certainly not foreign to the military. But in business, you don't hear that word a lot. As far as a leader being a servant, so it does come across a little maybe woke to some people. But what I hope that I'm able to do with y'all is to see the bottom line impact of servant leadership and show you how to apply it and get some of those results that we talk about. There are really 4 different aspects that I want to hit on that both I've observed, but also when I did my research to talk to y'all, I was fortunate enough to find out that that's what the experts will look at this. And the experts that I've been looking at are your typical PricewaterhouseCoopers, the consultants and the McKinseys of the world, former CEOs, folks like that, Harvard Business Review, those kinds of things. So I'll be giving statistics that I guess I should believe, because that's what these guys have done in their surveys and all their research. But they blew me away, some of these statistics. So the first thing that I think a servant leader does is he or she becomes humble enough to listen to employees. So part of serving somebody is to give them the respect that they know what they're talking about. So why not listen to them? That is an experience that one of my first experiences after leaving the military was as a speechwriter for Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE. And it was interesting because at that time, Jack Welch was not a very admired person. And certainly he was seen as somebody who wasn't good to employees. He had a nickname, they called him at that time, Neutron Jack. Neutron bombs were nuclear bombs that could be used. They were never used, but they could have been used, and there was a lot of talk about it at the time, to blow up areas of the enemy's country. And one of the things they did, they killed people, but they didn't destroy the facilities. They didn't destroy plants and things like that. So the point there was Welch they had 400,000 employees when he took over as CEO. By the time I joined him a year or so later, there were only 300,000. And basically that's why they called him Neutron Jack. They still had all the facilities, and they were selling off these businesses and all that. So Welch had a bad rap at the time. He worked hard to overcome that. They had a school there that he really promoted a lot, that it was a place that high performers could go. It was kind of the equivalent to your business school, to the MBA school that you all are working in, or the business school that you're working in. And it's called Crotonville. So he decided one time to go to Crotonville and to make a speech. And that was going to be, at the time, he said, Jack, I'd like you to work with me on my presentation there to the students there. I won't be able to go back very much because we got so much going on. They had just bought RCA and they were trying to integrate the company. I won't have a lot of time to do it, but I really do want to go there. Okay, so I worked on the presentation. We go there. He gives his presentation, and he was giving it in a hall, and it was all high potential emerging leader types that were in this class. And the hall was like an auditorium with tiered seats way up there. And so at the end of his presentation, somebody way up in the back raised, and by the way, before I get to this, back in the headquarters, nobody challenged Welch. They were afraid of him. He was kind of a tough guy. He was a wise guy too. He could be, a bit of a wise guy. And people didn't challenge him. And so he gets there, the guy in the back, and his first question is, hey, do you talk to our boss, Mr. Welch, do you talk to our bosses, our managers? He said, of course I do. I send them this. We have these management meetings, blah, blah, blah. And the guy says, well, it sure doesn't sound like it, because the stuff you were telling us about the vision and strategy for GE isn't what our bosses are telling us. In fact, they don't tell us much. So he said, he started stuttering. Welch had a stutter, and when he got excited, he stuttered and all. So anyway, somebody else raised their hand over here and way up again. Same thing in my unit, blah, blah, blah. And they started hitting him with all these tough questions. And and he answered the questions. He studied. After a while, he didn't stutter so much, but he kept answering the questions. So we go back in the car, and he said, Jack, that was great. He said, that was what I want to do. I want to go back there every month. I want to see every class that comes through. I want to do that in every class. So he had become energized by this interaction. He had become a, quote, servant leader in a way, because he was listening and he became energized. So what does he do then? But he does the ultimate of servant leadership. He says that he expects his leaders to do the same thing. And he started a program called Workout. You can look it up and you can probably find it in Wikipedia, but it was a GE program in which what happened is he required all leaders to convey meetings like he just had and to encourage questions from their people, and to get those people to give ideas. It was then the requirement of the leader to give feedback, but not necessarily right away. The leader could go away and say, I will come back to you with an answer. The leader then had to either come back and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do about your idea, whatever, or here's why we can't do it. But they had to give that feedback. So that in many ways during the late 1980s, early 1990s helped to make GE year after year after year get picked as one of the best companies, or the best company in the world, several of those years. Why? Because they inculcated this idea of listening, which is a basic tenet of servant leadership. I'll give you one more example. At Alcoa, we had a business unit that was struggling. It had struggled year after year after year. We had 130 different locations around the world. This particular one happened to be in China, in Bohai, China, and it was really in the bottom 10 of the 130. So we had a leader come in who wasn't leader of that unit, but he was leader of one of the three global business units, president of the global business unit. He goes out there and he does this, and he had an ethic that was speaking up or to be comfortable, not courageous. And he believed in that. And I think he really imposed that. And so he goes out to Bohai and he sees that the bosses aren't doing that. And so he goes and he meets with some of the second-tier people and asks them, how can we improve the place? How can we improve the place? He heard so many good ideas that they basically said to the bosses, goodbye, and he took the ideas of these people and took some of these people and rose them up and gave them the responsibility to run the business. That business, about 2 years later, won the award for the most improved business of all 130 locations around the world, most improved, and also got the award for the highest employee engagement scores of any business, because we did an annual employee engagement survey. If you want to find out more about that, that particular president of that business unit who did all of that, who went out there, flew out there to China and changed it all, happens to be your professor Meggers. So, and Kai was in what he did there, and it was a perfect example of really a leader who was a servant to the people, because he elicited this feedback and he took action. Okay. To empower those people. And from what I understand, that leadership team that he put in probably 10 years ago is still there and still working hard and still doing a good job. So listening then becomes key. Second point that I'd like to talk about, and by the way, if you want more on listening, there's lots, you can go online and find lots of how to on listening skills, the things you do. There's things, for example, let's say, let people finish, let them talk. Don't try to cut in, nod, encourage them. Okay. Give them the sense that they can be courageous. Okay. In letting you know what's going on. Give them immediate feedback. Don't use but, use and, don't do the and but thing, use it. So there's so many little things, and it's easy to go find them online. How do I improve my listening skills? Key to being a servant leader. Second point, Second point is probably the one that's closest to people accusing me of being a socialist or a woke socialist, why? Because it deals with things that are intangible, and I'm talking about the word purpose and meaning. Let me give you another quote here that really impressed me here. First of all, the current CEO of J&J, who became the chair of something called the Business Roundtable, and which is going through leading a lot of change in the way big corporations act. His name is Alec Gorsky. He actually went to my alma mater, went to West Point. He said, the quote that really impresses me of Gorsky's, I will find. He said this: the most important lesson for me when I became a CEO has been the importance of making all of our employees part of something bigger than themselves. Now that's kind of a not a wishy-washy, but it's a vague statement. What does that mean? And we'll talk about that. The impact that can have and the power that brings to the company can't be understated. To our company, can't be understated. So that was Gorsky's point. And the thing that, like I say, it's what does that mean? Bigger than yourself? Well, actually, I found a quote from somebody I saw on the news this morning. It happens to be the CEO of Best Buy, and her name was Corey Barry. And she was talking this morning about the impact of yesterday, Cyber Monday, and how Best Buy's sales were and all that kind of stuff. But she had this great quote that I found, and she said, and she kind of gives more meaning to what Gorsky was saying, which is, you unleash massive potential when you tie your employees' personal purpose to the purpose of the company. They will help steer you toward what is important and the stance that you will take. So basically, again, what she's saying, a servant leader, then, she admits that employees are steering them, but she says that'll only happen if they feel that there's meaning in what they do and what they work, and that their leader allows them to see what that meaning is. I summarize it with two words, meaning values and value. Let's talk about values first. So first of all, values, every company has a value, most companies have a value statement, whether you're in a real estate agency or a trucking company or Best Buy. Everybody's got a value statement. Today, employee activism is becoming much greater. And what employers are looking for is that their personal values, their personal purpose, as Corey Barry says, is aligned with what the company is saying. One. Two, they're also looking for the company to stand up and deal with social issues. And this is something we all saw last year, certainly, in following the George Floyd murder, and there was in the racial justice area. So there was so much employee activism at work, actually in the past 2 or 3 years, that you see employees saying either I must have, my values must match, or I'll walk, I'll leave, that kind of thing. So there's the employee activism that goes around this idea of value. But on the other hand, value, that the employee is valued. So that the leader says to the employee, I value you. I value what you're doing. I value you enough to listen to you. And in an interesting way, I think both of them work. I think both of them are important. I think that for an employee to go home at night and to be able to say, there's meaning in what I do. Here's what I did today. It was for a customer. It helped the customer. It helped the company. It helped one of my peers. Something that there was some meaning that their leader allowed them to take away. Okay, I think is really very, very key there. So this idea about meaning is another big one. There's a study, I told you that I've done some research here, that one of the studies, and is written up in HBR, is that the study was trying to look at how much does this idea of purpose and meaning, what's the financial impact of it? First of all, as far when they compared a lot of companies, a lot of employees, they found out that 9 out of 10 employees say they would rather work for a boss who gives them a sense of meaning and that their success matters. Okay. But what they then went on to ask their employees is, would you work for a company if it meant that you might be able to make more money in another company where that wasn't that important? 23%, or not 23%, but actually the difference. And they try to find out, what's the salary difference? How much is it going to take us to steal you away from a company where you feel meaning, as far as pay goes, to go to a company where that's not a big deal? And basically the element was, we'll take a 23% pay cut, or we'll forfeit 23% in pay increase to work for a company in which meaning is important to us. That was one of the statistics that came around. They also found the bottom line impact was about 1 hour per week of improved productivity from between the employees who said meaning is important versus meaning is not important, which translates to about $9,000 of productivity value a year. Another one, which is very interesting, on the job tenure, employees who feel that they can see the meaning in their job and their bosses reinforce that. Job tenure is about 7.4 more months in those two categories, which doesn't sound like much, but if you're a big company like a GE, for every 10,000 employees, that counts to about $6.43 million, okay, in profit. Why? Because actually turnover is very expensive. Turnover is about 150% of the salary of an employee, whether the employee is a frontline employer or a CEO. You're basically, it's going to cost you, if that employee quits, it's going to cost you about 150% between everything, between perhaps losing customers, perhaps delays in meeting, productivity, certainly in fees to add-on to fees. One of my clients, I'm a coach to CEOs. One of my clients has actually had to totally, their whole budget going into 2021 had what they thought was a reasonable amount for recruiting fees. It is actually 5 times more. Their recruiting fees are 5 times more what they had in their budget because of what's called the Great Resignation that's going on today. So what's bad about it, though, is each month it's increasing. So, it was about 2% of people quitting back in February. I think in September it was 3-point-something%. You multiply three times 12, that's 36% of the workforce, which is very interesting because the statistics that are coming out now are basically coming out I've seen the numbers. So McKinsey says it's 40%, that 40% of today's employees are thinking about quitting or planning to quit, not thinking about, planning to quit. PricewaterhouseCoopers says 65%. Monster.com says 90%. Now, I think Monster has a vested interest here in encouraging employees to quit. But so somewhere between 40% and 65% of employees are actually thinking about quitting. And certainly in my clients that I'm working with, I see that. So when you leave WKU and go back to work, I mean, obviously this is going to be, if you have any kind of a managerial responsibility, it's going to be a responsibility of yours to do that. If you're not a management person, I hope that you'll think about the impact of you quitting because it's going to cost your employee a lot of money to replace you. So that's those are the first two things. I've got two more, but before I do, I'd like to stop, and Leslie's going to help me with if there's any questions and answers, questions that you may have, and we'll go on to the third and the fourth kind of impact things. So I've talked about listening and the importance of listening. I've talked about that servant leaders help their employees to understand why what they do is important, why they're valued. And they also help their employees to see that there's an alignment between the values of the company and the employees' values. Okay. Questions?
If you feel more comfortable putting a question in the chat, feel free to do so. I will be checking that.
Yeah, you check the chats. That'd be good. Yeah, just write the questions up and then Leslie will throw them at me. And you can throw them at me anytime you want, Leslie. Yeah.
One thing that I was kind of wondering about, as some of our students, I know whether they watch it once it's recorded or are here, are likely going into the interview process. And I can't think of a better leader that you would want as your boss rather than a servant leader. And how can we as young professionals, when we go through that interview process and meet with recruiters, ask those questions that give us an insight into, in a very respectful way, that give us insight into whether or not we're working under someone with certain leadership, with servant leadership qualities?
Oh, that's good. Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's very important that the interview process, you find out whether this is a person who values employees, and it because ultimately it's extremely important from a career standpoint to work for a boss who he or she is on the way up. They're not going to be threatened by you being ambitious or good, and they're going to be a good mentor. And because ultimately a servant leader is a mentor, they care enough to give some of their time to help other people, to help particularly people that work for them. So that's really important. On the other side, though, I mean, how do you more or less impress, or if you do find somebody you really want to work with, how do you let them know? And today, like I say, today I'm helping I've got 7 CEOs that I coach and some of their managers. I would say they want to hear that somebody is willing to stick with them. Everybody's concerned today that it's very transient. And I think people who are probably most of you on the call are in your 20s. I think they get a bad rap. I think they get a rap that they are, that they're constantly moving. The fact is, the statistics say that it's the mid-level employees that are the most right now that are moving. Those are what they call the great resignation. The quitters are people in their 30s and early 40s. And that's what the statistics say. So I would say an important selling point is, I've heard what you said. I'd really like to work here. And I'd really like to make this a place that I can advance. Is there, and then ask the question, what is the growth? What do you see as the growth opportunities for somebody like me? That's the way I would play it. Okay?
Yeah, that's so interesting, because then you're going to hear, based upon that answer, how much willingness and effort they're willing to put in and how much thought they put into it, which is, I've never thought of it that way before.
Yeah. Is this guy or woman a servant leader?
Right.
One, but two, even if they're not perfect, as I've said, Are they somebody who you can learn from? Are they somebody that you can learn from? So that's, yeah. Okay. Well, now the next thing is, are they somebody who cares about people? And I think that is extremely important. There's a great, to me, it's the quote that I believe, and it's a quote that got incurred into us. It's a feeling that got incurred into us in the military as a leader, which is that you lead others in order to you'll do whatever it takes in order to help others. So the biggest question that you can, if you're a manager or a leader, the best question you can ask somebody is, how can I help you? How can I help you? Okay. It is the basic question of a servant leader. Now, why? Because ultimately, employees want to know that you care. Empathy is, you've heard of the word empathy as being a key attribute of a leader, but it's ultimately all about caring. People do not care how much you know until they know you care. People do not care how much you know and how great you are until they know that you care. And I think that this idea, and that's the way I see empathy playing out. How do you show empathy? Okay, certainly it's like I say, asking, how can I help? Certainly by showing that you want them to go home at night, that you want them to go home at night in the same shape that they left in the morning. Okay, at Alcoa, that was huge. That was huge. Safety at Alcoa was a basic cultural norm that other companies admired and looked up to, and all of that. And for a leader, you got measured, right, Kai? You were measured by how well you did in safety. And you had all these various metrics, whether days lost due to injuries and those kinds of things. But the worst metric was a death. Okay. And if you had a death, the executive might well get fired, but the entire executive chain up to the CEO, their bonuses got hit. Okay. Because if there was a death in the firm, in the company. So the idea of saying that we value you, we want to give meaning to your work, but we also want you to be able to go home safe. We want you to go home, and we also want you to go home proud of where you work. That goes back to that meaning point, so that you can talk to your children, you can talk to your spouse, you can talk to your neighbors about the company in a good way. So that brings me to trust. The word trust. In frankly, all of the employee engagement surveys that I've seen out there, Gallup does one. There's a few of them. Connexa does another one, and we use Connexa. And we looked at 40 different attributes, and we had employees rank, how well the company did on them. But the most important, the most consistent with employee engagement was trust. I trust my leader. I trust my boss. I trust my leader. I trust, and that idea of trust and walking the talk and what was it at Siemens, Kai? They used to say, Dr. Von Peer used to say, I do what I say. I think he used to always say that. You're on mute. Yeah.
I got that. Say again, Jack. What was I didn't catch all of it.
At Siemens, our CEO, Dr. Von Peer, used to talk about this idea: we do what we say. In other words, the concept of we don't talk unless we act according to what we say we're going to do. Yes. And so that's very, 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 very important. Mm-hmm. Now, trust. Coming back again to a financial or an important outcome of all we're talking about here, of caring, which then leads to trust. There's a survey that's done every year. It's so important and so becomes so relevant now that it's actually briefed at the World Economic Forum in Davos every year to all the corporations and the CEOs and the leaders of countries that go there. It's called the Trust Barometer, and a company called Edelman does it. And one of the most telling ones to me was a question that they asked to all the publics. They asked publics across the board, and they do it on an international basis. One of the questions is, who do you trust the most to talk about about an organization? Who do you trust the most? Do you trust the CEO? Do you trust the science officer? Do you trust journalists to write about it? Do you trust investors? Do you trust partners? Who do you trust the most? And what it turns out is the frontline employee. The frontline employee is trusted more than the CEO of an organization, as far as what they say about the company. So for no other reason, a servant leader, a company that puts the employees, that understands that a CEO should serve the employees and that the employees should trust the company, for no other reason that all these publics, including politicians who give the right to a company to govern, all of these people, they trust the frontline employees. So to me, that's why I think it's important. The fourth point, and it's kind of related, and it's very current, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's become something that companies are grappling with. They've made commitments that they're going to improve in that area, and they're going to do all those things. Now, a servant in a company with a servant leader, it's natural, that where values such as respect and such as collaboration and those kinds of things, it's natural that they're going to be more inclined to be good in this area, in the whole diversity area. Now, you can talk about diversity, and we see all these views about why diversity is. I mean, there's a lot of statistics that say companies that respect diversity are companies that do very well, which frankly I believe. But I would come back to one that has to be indisputable, which is that with diversity and with accepting people, no matter of their background, gender, any of those kinds of things, if you're totally open to them, your talent pool is going to be much bigger than if you're going to be focused on a much narrower talent pool, a la the white male talent pool, for example. So that works its way through the organization, not just in the overall organization, it works its way up through the ranks. So to me, the larger talent pool makes the biggest difference. However, diversity in and of itself isn't enough, and that's where the word inclusion comes in. And the word inclusion means that yes, now you've got a diverse workforce, but they are totally included. All of the things I've been talking about, listening to them, including them in understanding how they're aligned with the values and the meaning, and they see their purpose to be aligned. All of those things are part of, quote, inclusion. I had a woman, an African-American woman in this case, define for me inclusion in her mind. And for her mind, and the way she defined it was simply diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance, asked to dance. And I want to tell you a little story about an organization that obviously I've mentioned a couple of times that was part of my life, both because I went there as a cadet to West Point, but I happened to go back there as a professor for 3 years. When I went back, it was not a diverse, the Cadet Corps was not a diverse corps. We had 2,400 cadets, only 33 of them were African-American. We had 0 women because at that time women were not allowed to enter the Corps. And we talked a lot about, this, and there were folks who said, there's no way women are ever going to come to West Point. It doesn't fit. They can't put up with the rigors of combat and all that kind of stuff. But then on the African American side, there was a real strong effort to bring more African Americans to West Point. And I was very much involved in that because they wanted somebody to teach a Black Studies course, and there was no African American teachers, so I volunteered to do it. So I got to know those 33 cadets very well. By the way, one of them is today the Secretary of Defense, General Austin. But anyway, my point there was they worked. The Academy decided to work on it. Okay, so they worked on it, and that's one of the reasons they did. Today there are over 500 African Americans at the Academy. But more important is the women. Okay, they did start bringing women in, and the reason, frankly, unfortunately, I think wasn't because they recognized how good it was going to be for the Army at the time. They were told they had to do it. So they did it. The reason I bring that up is that over time, the Academy took a serious approach, not just to diversity, but to inclusion, and they gave the women opportunity. So in those years since then, I know of at least four years where the top cadet, the cadet who leads the parade onto the parade ground, the cadet who has the highest leadership acknowledgement, they call that person the Corps commander, the brigade commander, and that person has been a woman 4 times. The current, and one time it was an African American woman. The current brigade commander is a woman today. So we've seen that inclusion. So how does that manifest itself in KPIs, key performance indicators or anything? Let me tell you, the biggest KPI for us back when I was on the faculty was if we could get a Rhodes Scholar. If we could get just one Rhodes Scholar, then we all felt great that some cadet was able to become a Rhodes Scholar. There are only 32 American Rhodes Scholars every year that are chosen from around the country. And so it was great if we could get one. Okay, last year, the Academy got 2 Rhodes Scholars, which was amazing. Yeah, they got 2. It turns out one was a black woman, the other was a black man, 2 cadets. This year, the Academy got 4 Rhodes Scholars. 4 out of 32 Americans were at the Academy. All 4 were women. All 4 were women. And so my point there is, whereas when I was on the faculty, people would say there's no way, and now this KPI that was so important to us there, we beat it. We beat it in a big way. So that's my point, is that a servant leader is more likely to be open to, to inclusion and to equity, giving everybody a good chance to succeed. So that is, to me, that's the 4 elements of what I wanted to talk about. I was an Army Ranger, which is why we put that in the title. What is an Army? How does that play into this whole thing as a servant leader? We were told that the most important thing, everything I learned in the Army from the first days, was you never ask your soldiers to do anything that you wouldn't do. You never ask anybody to do something that you wouldn't do. And I believe that in business it works too. I really, really do. It hit me very hard. And, for me, it was a theory. But within the first week that I went into combat, in this case, it was in Vietnam, I came upon my unit. I was on a patrol, and my unit came upon an American unit and I could see all the soldiers just kind of very nervous and looking around and watching around them. And then I looked out and I saw this man crawling across the ground, sticking his knife, his bayonet, into the ground. And the reason he was doing that is that's the way you find mines, by putting it. He was going into the middle of a minefield. Why? Because one of the soldiers had stepped on a mine. His foot was blown off. He was bleeding, and he was trying to get out to save him. Turned out he was the lieutenant. He was in charge. He was the officer. So he wouldn't ask somebody to do something he wouldn't do. And so all of this learning that I had about, you never ask anybody, it hit me right hard, right there, that way. And one of the things about the Rangers that they do for you, they also say, you have everybody's back, you have each other's back, and you never leave anybody. You never leave anybody behind. So if you know that, if you're killed, they'll come back and get you, So to me, that concept of having people's back, having not just as you as a manager when you become a manager, but also your peers having their back is so important. There's little things too. I'll just give you two little. I say little, they're important, but they're gestures, and you have to figure out what are the gestures that work in wherever you work. If you work in a corporation, or in a company, or in a real estate office, or in a McDonald's, wherever you work, try to think what are the gestures that will mean something, particularly if you become a foreman or a manager or a leader. So anyway, two that the Army had, and then I'll finish. One was the leader eats last. So when people ate, the officer had to be the last one to eat. Okay, very important. It's something that shocked me when I got on the civilian side, when I saw executive dining rooms and things like that. We didn't have those in the military. You ate with the soldiers and you ate last. The other one was very interesting. And it was that when you came back from a patrol, the leader, everybody had to take their boots off. The leader had to go down the line and look at the feet of every person and do that. I mean, it's a very humbling thing for a leader to do, to be standing there feeling the feet. Why? Because you wanted to be sure that person's feet were not damaged by any of the moisture and all that you go through when you're going through the jungle. And it's important too, because if somebody does have, starts getting disease in their feet, they're not able to perform. I bring that up because these are gestures that were natural, and they're something that very much show a surgeon leadership. Now, I bring it up also because I do think gestures are important in figuring out, in whatever job we have, what are the things that we can do to let people know that we're not on an ego trip as a leader, okay, that we are a servant leader. So I'd like to bring questions up, and then if you give me 3 minutes, I'll conclude after the Q&A. So questions.
Yeah, I got one, Jack. Leslie, okay to ask? All right. If you don't mind, share the story with the women in Korea, Jack, where you had the trouble in the outpost. You know what I mean, right?
I do. So I was a battalion commander in Korea, and I had these outposts all along the DMZ, between North and South Korea. And the soldiers lived there alone in these little outposts. There were about 6 or 7, and they would actually live there. I was constantly having problems with them because some of them were having accidents with their Jeeps. The other problem was every 4 hours they had to call in to let me know everything was okay. If they didn't call in, I'd give them another hour, and then I had to send a helicopter out. And usually I'd find out that they had just screwed around and they forgot to call in. And so in the midst of my tour, I end up getting 155 women soldiers. They were the first. That's when women first started getting put into combat units. And so I put them in outposts, on their own outposts, all women outposts. I always got the calls on time from the women outposts, never had a problem. And so then what I did is I integrated the outposts, and I put women in all the outposts, and all of the problems I had, all the accidents I had, never had to send a helicopter out to, all of those kinds of things happen. So that made me a real believer, in diversity. Other questions?
I had a question. You mentioned that you coach like CEOs and stuff, and I just was wondering, like, some of the biggest like challenges that they face, or some of the biggest topics you might discuss with some of those people, because they're like, leading the companies and things like that. And I just wanted to get a better insight as to what challenges they may be dealing with.
Right now, the biggest challenge, and your name again?
No.
I'm Janelle.
Hello, Janelle. Good. So, Janelle, the biggest challenge that we're facing right now, all my companies are facing right now, is caused by the remote work situation that most of the companies are in. They feel that this camaraderie that comes about with socializing with other people, has been broken up. They're also, and what's happening is the people that are all working from home, and they're getting burned out. They're actually working more than they worked when they went to job. And so the whole burnout thing, and they don't have an answer to it, because in a lot of cases, they still can't move people back in. Several of my companies are in big cities, like New York, for example. And it's not safe yet to go in. So the biggest challenge for leaders today is doing some of the things I talked about as a servant leader remotely. Yeah. I wish I had an answer what to do about it. There's a lot of tricks that you can have. And I mean, we even had one company had a bartender. They had everybody like what do you call it? At Friday evening before the end of the work
Happy hour.
They had a happy hour, and everybody got on Zoom, and they had a bartender show how to mix different kinds of drinks, and we all toasted each other. But we tried. Other comments, questions? Comments.
Yeah, I got one comment, Jack, in terms of for your second point, purpose and meaning. I once read a story about a reporter who went and it was during the Apollo program, right, getting a man to the moon, and he interviewed people who were part of this endeavor, and he talked also to a janitor, and he asked the janitor, "Hey, what's your job here?" And the answer from the janitor was, "Well, I'm helping to put a man on the moon."
Yeah, right.
So this is a perfect example for being part of something bigger, and for somebody who usually is looked at as just doing a mundane job that not many people like to do, feeling so included in this and internalizing the mission that he didn't think about what he did as doing this mundane job that we think about, but he said, "Well, I'm just helping to get the mission done," right?
Yeah. That's interesting, Guy, because there are probably companies certainly companies that don't have such big purpose, and even somebody who's in a leadership role might have a problem with seeing the benefit, but there are benefits. Let's say McDonald's. Let's say you are the manager of a McDonald's operation. The fact is they have done a lot of good things on the nutrition side, and the fact is that they also are serving communities of need. So there's always something that can be found in your work. And by the way, if there isn't, you probably ought to find another job, because purpose is so very, very important. Yeah. Any other ideas, comments, or anything? Because then I'd like to tell you about an organization that has picked up on this servant leadership thing. And I found out about it because actually my alma mater, West Point, is actually doing a lot of work in this area in servant leadership. And they did a podcast recently, and they invited the CEO of an organization called the Tillman Foundation. And raise your hand if anybody remember Pat Tillman, who he was. Yeah, it's a couple of.
Yep.
Yeah,
of course. Number 42.
You don't even know his number.
Yeah, you had two different 40 and 42, one with Arizona State and one with the Cardinals.
Yeah. So look at that. Guy is an expert on I I've always known that. I mean, he's the football. So Pat Tillman, like you said, went to Arizona State and then went on and played for Arizona. And he was a safety, right?
Safety, yeah.
Good safety. He walked away right after 9/11. Way back, he walked away from a $3.5 million salary and became an Army Ranger, and became a private, in the Army Rangers. He was killed there in Afghanistan. And what happened was afterwards, obviously, there was a lot of attention paid to him. And a number of people got together, and companies got together and funded this. And it was basically, it's an organization that invites people to present things that they will do, students like yourselves, or even people out of college that they want to do, that will be a service, something that will serve their community or society. And they pick, of the 3,000 or so that they get every year, these proposals, they pick 60 of them and they fund them. They fund the effort. They fund, if somebody's in school, they'll fund they'll pay their tuition if they're, and they call it the Pat Tillman Foundation. And the reason they do that, and the CEO of it today, the guy who runs it today is a former Ranger, is this whole idea that goes all the way back to service. Okay. And many of the people that get these grants are in business. They recognize that this whole idea of a servant leader, okay, applies to business. So many of the people that get these grants are people who are basically saying, I want to do this because I want to be a servant leader in business. So that's really my theme, is an opportunity for y'all as you go out there with your MBA certificate, and to really try to find what is that way that you can try some of the things that I've talked about today. Okay. Good. No more questions. Thank you.
No, hold on. I got one more, Jack, because excellent point. In order to, when you want to get out, first thing is you need to get a job, right? So if you don't mind, please share with them the CVS Westinghouse story, how General Powell helped you to get your first job in the civilian life. And because that shows the power of networking, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. That is a very important. It also shows the importance of mentoring. So I was speechwriter for the Secretary of Defense, Weinberger. General Powell was a one-star general at the time. So he wasn't famous at that time, but he was a one-star general. And he and I were the only two Army officers on Mr. Weinberger's staff. So I got to know him. I went to see him one day when I decided to get out of the Army. And I really had not a lot of real skills. I had been a Ranger, that there's not too many needs for that outside. But I was fortunate enough to be the speechwriter in my last tour. And I said, do you know anybody in the civilian world who's looking for people like me, and a speechwriter, communications kind of person? And he said, yeah, I do know this man in New York, Tom Ross, who's the head of corporate communications for RCA. And so I said, would you ask him to give me an idea? So I went up. So sure enough, he called Mr. Tom Ross. I went up to see him. And it was funny because I drove up and I had no resume. I didn't know anything about the civilian world. And I was in my car, and it was in New York City, and I couldn't find a parking space. So when I finally find a parking space and I go upstairs, I'm nervous. And I go in and I say, his name was Tom Ross. Hello, Mr. Lade. I'm sorry, I'm Ross. Hello, Mr. Lade. Sorry, I'm Ross. So I screwed up my first words with this guy. Anyway, the guy had a good talk with him. He told me to sit down, got me relaxed and all that. The next day I got a call from the HR guy. The HR guy says, Tom Ross wants to hire you. So I went to work for the man. And years later, I asked him, I said, why did you hire me? I had no experience in the civilian world. And he said, because that morning, my wife would give me a hard time when about coming home from work so late. I was always late coming home from work. And I remembered what Colin told me, Colin Powell. I remember what Colin told me. And he told me when he called me up about you, Jack works hard. He'll make your day 3 hours shorter. So you got me on the right day because my wife had given me grief that morning. So here's a man who was my mentor, who unfortunately has just passed away, who really helped me move on and get a great job. And that job led to working for Welsh. And then that job, those of you who are in marketing, that job then got me into the marketing business. So I became the CEO of a marketing company. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. I wish we were all together where we could clap for you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I'm very excited to have this recorded so that way our students that were unable to attend will be able to still hear from you. So thank you so much for taking the time. It means so much, and this was incredibly valuable. So.
Thanks, Leslie. And I'm on LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect. Okay, great.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. Have a great evening, you guys.
You take care, Jack. Always good to see you, man.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.